For me, communication is not, two people talking at each other, yelling or fighting or, having tension in their communication. It's not effective in that it's not going to bring about clarity or, for me, communication is the great clarifier. Who you are within the communication determines the outcome of that communication.
What I do is I look at how have I lived communication in the past, and then, what were the consequences of how I was living it, and then what I changed to how I would like to live it from here on out. And for me, in the past, for a long time, communication was often emotional. And it would have to do with how I'm feeling about something and what emotions I'm going through and, justifying that, explaining that. And really the emotions and feelings were the focus of my communication because it's my experience, it's what that's my source, is myself. It's very emotional. In a relationship, for example, and I feel hurt and I going into blame and saying, why it's the other person's fault and why I'm justified for being angry, upset, that kind of thing, for me is what stands out. Doesn't mean it's how I always communicated, but for me, when it would be like, okay, let's sit down and clarify this. This is how I'm feeling. This is why. This is what you've done. That kind of typical conversation. And so then through, understanding my emotions and taking responsibility for them, when I look at communication, it will be communication with others where I'm coming from more a starting point of self-responsibility, but also what am I kind of going through, how am I correcting myself, and that would be with others on top of, practical points and day-to-day points. And then also there's the communication that I have with myself, which also needed to be developed, where it's like more self-introspection and expanding, getting to know myself, because for a long time I had overlooked even having those kinds of conversations with myself.
There was no communication. It was like things weren't really dealt with. Things weren't really discussed. They were either sugar-coated, like if something serious was happening with the family. It was like sugar-coated for some of us. Not all the truth was given. It wasn't all the information. And so, and then just in general, if there's ever issues between family members, there would be just like tension because no one was actually discussing the real issues. It would be a problem, then they'd go to their separate places, and then there'd be stewing in it. And so for me, communication was how I learned about it in the family was you don't communicate. And that's how I developed. Like, I didn't really understand the effectiveness of communication and the purpose of communication.
Yeah, well, two things came up for me when you started talking about that. One is deaths in the family, where the mourning process was a private, hidden thing, where nobody really talked about what they were going through in terms of the sadness, the guilt, the regret. Like, those words did not come up, the loss. And then only years later did I find out the process that, for example, my parents went through when they lost their parents. And so when you're growing up, it's nice to have that example of how to mourn, for example. And for me, it was like this hidden thing. And then in terms of conflict, it would be outbursts of arguments and fighting. And then the explaining and making up and understanding, that would also happen in private, between the two.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, it's kind of piecemeal, and you only get maybe the overly controlled communication where it's like, if you experience a loss in your family, the parents or whoever will want to remain stable and present that kind of face.
Sure.
And then the uncontrolled communication, which is the angry, frustrated outbursts. But all that kind of working through and processing information and settling disputes and getting that understanding was done, I'd say, not purposefully, but it's just the way it was from whatever generational education was. That happened behind closed doors in private. The kids were not exposed to that.
I suppose I had kind of, I wouldn't say two extremes, but I had two different parents. So where my dad would talk to me about anything and everything, and talk about what he was going through, what he was thinking, how he was looking at things, and was just like really open and honest about everything. The other people in my life were not. So when I was growing up, I had the relationship, let's call it, develop with my dad, where I felt comfortable with him. I wanted to tell him things. I wanted to be open with him because I felt that I could trust him. I felt that he would understand me, or he'd try to get to a point where he can understand me, and keep asking questions rather than like just reacting and judging me or saying, you know, that's bad or that's good. It was more of an like objective kind of point of reference. That was quite different when I was growing up, but I learned very quickly when I was a kid that you can't be like that with other people, because at least not, just off right, because people take advantage of you and they don't have that same starting point. They don't have that same like wanting the best for you type of place that they're coming from. So, I'd share something with a friend, for example, and they'd use it against me. Mm. So that's kind of where the conflict came in, because there were these two very different experiences. The one that was the more pleasant one of like, okay, this is what it should be like, and then the one of, okay, this is reality, where people are dicks and people are lying and people are taking advantage of me, and all of this other stuff is happening, and people won't just tell me how they're feeling, won't just tell me what's going on. It's just all this like secretive or like sugar-coated. It was just bullshit like everywhere, and it was quite difficult to, I suppose, like acclimate myself to that, because it just seemed so unnecessary, especially when I was young. It was like, why are people like this? Can't we just
work together?
Let's just talk, and let's be open and honest and get to the same page, and stop playing all these silly games, because that's what, a lot of communication is, just all these games.
Like, I'm definitely learning a lot from seeing this child being raised, because it's very specific the way it's being done with communication, where as the parents or me as an adult, which is sometimes responsible for him, you don't react to what he's saying. Like, it's been practice for me. Like, I'll react, and then I will slow myself down and communicate with him just on the really practical, common sense situation that's going on, understanding that he's a child exploring the world, and he's doing all sorts of stuff that I think is wrong and bad, or like I want him to do something different, but instead really just letting him figure out the world, and anything that he comes at us with is listened to and understood, and there's no reaction of this is right or wrong. It's just, could this possibly be consequential to yourself or anybody else or not? So I find that that's another thing that I had become accustomed to, was like the majority of the time communicating from a reaction of some kind, or from a desire, or, you know, manipulation. And to experience now communicating with a child and with the adults here, there's so much more understanding that opens up, where you really get to see so many dimensions of a person. And then it's kind of like a snowball effect that builds on itself, because as you get to know a person, what they're going through, why they are the way they are, who they are, and you gain more understanding, you're less likely to react, because you understand that they're just going through their own shit in this world just like everybody else, and they're trying their best and they're correcting themselves. And so that really opened up communication. I link it to gaining understanding first and foremost, because with that understanding, you can see more clearly the multidimensional reality that each and every single person actually is. And that has been incredibly eye-opening for me. And so as Caesar, the child here, grows up and we're all going through this learning process together, it's almost like I'm a child again when I'm with him, because I'm also equally learning how to communicate like this with him and through my interactions with him. So that's been amazing. For Caesar, I got here and he came into my life years after I had already been developing this understanding.
Sure.
So I would say the children in my life before were my practice ground.
Yeah.
Or, you know, I thought that I always knew best because I'm the parent or the guardian, or, I mean, not the parent, but like the stand-in parent. And that I always had to tell them what was the right thing to do, what was the wrong thing to do. And now it's like, it's completely equal. It's like, let's discover together, you know, how to handle this, or what's the best way, or even just take my hands off and shut my mouth, you know, and just let him express and listen, understand.
I always had a point with kids between like talking, like when they first start talking, maybe 4 to, I don't know, 6 or 7. I never really was interested in like interacting with kids at that age, because there was this like resistance within me. I just was like, I don't know what to talk about. And then recently, in the last few months, I've you know, come into contact with more kids at that age. They are so fun to talk to, because they are so just like, they have all these questions, and like when you are just communicating as yourself and to them as an equal, as just another person, it's like, it is so engaging and like fulfilling talking to these kids, because there's nothing that is behind them that's hidden. There's no like ulterior motive. There's nothing, like they're just completely exposed and open and excited about life. And it was just like the coolest thing. And I thought that was really interesting, how I always resisted talking to kids. And a friend of mine said, it's like a point of self-trust. It's like you can trust yourself to interact with a child, because, you know, before I didn't really trust myself, because I didn't have that understanding of communication, or like speaking to someone without anything hidden within myself, you know, how to be completely open and vulnerable with someone, which I think is what helps communication be effective.
Also, when you communicate with kids in that way, you can't, like, there's times where Caesar comes into my room, you know, I live with him in the same house and I have work to do, and he comes into my room and he takes all of my focus, because I have to make sure he's not touching things that can break, and, you know, he's talking constantly. I got into a point once where I started to become resistant to him coming in my room. And I would say, you know, Caesar, I'm really tired right now. I can't be with you right now. I need some time alone. And it was totally an excuse. You know, I just had accumulated a resistance towards him that I hadn't worked through myself. And not a week later, he started using the excuse that he was too tired to do things that he had to do. And so I saw also that there's that responsibility, you know, if you're going to lie and manipulate the situation, you're also standing as an example for the child.
Yeah.
So I think it's very important to have that openness and honesty. And I can say to him, you know what, like, I'm feeling a little bit overwhelmed right now, and I have work to do, and so I need to be alone. what's wrong with that? You know, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Why was my first instinct to lie to him and say I'm too tired?
Yeah.
And so you have to catch these moments, and it's slippery, you know, they're sneaky moments because you're so used to talking like that, communicating like that. So for me, the communication with children has been incredible to just kind of catch these lies, these, you know, tainted communication, I'll call it.
For me at the moment, communication is, let's call it like the platform through which everyone can come together, and it's the platform through which we can create solutions or make more issues. And I think it's one of the biggest keys to creating good relationships, not only like in our personal lives, but you know, on a bigger global scale. And interestingly enough, I find that it's within intimate relationships where communication tends to be the most challenging. It's like it's a constant practice for me to see what am I actually saying, is how I'm saying it conveying where I'm actually at, or am I maybe being ambiguous in some way. Dealing with animals actually also changed my perspective a little bit, because when you're working with an animal, they're not just looking at what it is that you're trying to say to them, they're also looking at what does your whole body say, you know, what's your body language. And especially with horses, and especially when like I was unsure about something, or I was still learning how to, for example, ask a horse how to do a particular thing, I'd be very unsure of myself, and the horse would not respond to what I'm trying to ask them to do. They'd respond to who I was in that moment, which was uncertainty. And that was what I was communicating to them, because I was experiencing that so strongly that my body was basically screaming it. And it was not what I was trying to say, but that was the truth of who I was in the moment. And I think that a lot of the time people discount that truth of who they are in the moment, of what's going on inside us, of how I'm feeling, of if I'm conflicted about something. And the words that come out of our mouths is not the same as who we are. And that ends up having all this like kind of these mixed messages, and a lot of misinterpretation comes from that. And it also makes us realize that, you know, I may have an ideal goal of where I want to be, like with communication, or if I'm sharing something, I might be sharing the ideal place that I want to be at, or how I want to live something. Like, this is ideally how I want to be living communication, but the reality is different, because the reality is that I'm still working through the shit that comes up inside of me when I'm in those moments of communicating with people. I have these moments with my partner, so these are part of my challenges, where instead of communicating with him and sharing, okay, this is where I'm at, this is how I'm feeling, I'll be like, I'm just going to be quiet and angry, and it's his fault, and he should know how I'm feeling, and he should know what I'm thinking, and if he doesn't, well then he just needs to suffer my silence, and he's going to punish him. And
same with in our house with my partner. If there's silence in this house, there is an issue in this house, you know. And it takes communication to speak about it, but it's interesting because that's the first thing that goes. If there's an issue, is there's silence, and it's like thick silence.
It almost touches on every single part of our lives, and there's so much that connects in with it, because it's essentially how we relate to everything around us. And I think the bottom line is that I want to get to a point for me where effective communication is where and who I am on the inside is the same as who I am on the outside, and what I'm saying and how I'm saying it. I'm not trying to to hide myself, where I can be honest about, okay, this is where I'm at, this is what I'm dealing with, let's find a solution, or I need help, or let me help you. Whenever there's trouble, there's silence. That's when we're not talking.
We all need to be talking more, but it's the type of talking, like you said,
Yes.
who we are within the talking. Is there hidden agenda? Is there, half-truths? Is there like a veil of, presentation, or is it just real and what's here? And
I had been working on this point of communication in relation to vulnerability. And for me, like Cerise said, I want to think that I'm at a certain point, and like, okay, I'm strong and I'm confident. And I was talking to somebody and I was actually feeling the opposite of those things. And I decided to be upfront and just be like, you know what, I'm really nervous right now. And that was like such a load off, such a burden lifted, to just be like, I'm awkward. I don't know what to say right now. I'm very nervous about what I want to say. So let me just like fumble through this and get it out, and bear with me. And it was terrifying to be so open and upfront about who I really actually was in that moment. But in the end, it's like almost liberating to not feel like you have to put up a front or pretend to be something you're not, even though it seems to be like the instinct of what to do.
Well, for me, communication from a young age, because I've got dyslexia, and so when I want to talk about something, it just goes blank and I can't find the topic I want to talk about. So I found communication even very young. I can remember probably 4 or 5 at school. I'd be asked something and I'd know what I wanted to say, but I couldn't find it in my mind to actually say. I just couldn't communicate. It was like there was this block. And I had it for, well, I've got it now. Usually I don't know, that I want to talk about something or discuss something, but this block comes up. It's like everything disappears and I can't grasp all the things I want to say or bring out and say.
For me, I had a fear of coming into this and not having anything to say, because sometimes I find myself like without anything to say, I have nothing to input or whatever. And so but it was like a fear coming in here and, oh my gosh, what if I don't have anything to say? But what I found within that was it was actually based on a memory of moments in my past where I've been in a situation like this, or I've been with people where I might be expected to say something, but there's just nothing within me, or I'm not interested or whatever. So I had this fear of not having anything to say based on this past memory. Whereas a week ago, I had this positive experience of like, oh yeah, I'm going to be super expressive and everyone's going to be like awesome and it's just going to be a great flowing conversation. And that was based on, this imagination that I had. So it was interesting because, effective communication is just being in the moment, and just kind of like doing it. It's like with anything, you just do it and see who you are and you can direct yourself within it. But ultimately, it's letting go of the past and the future and just being here. And to me, that's when the points that need to be expressed are expressed.
The reality of the world is that sometimes we have to be dishonest. Sometimes we have to put on a brave face and put on a smile even though you're having a really tough time. The reality of living and surviving in the world is like not at all what we want it to be, and not at all supportive of this ideal living expression of communication. So how do we then come to terms with the reality that we can't truly in all parts of our lives live this ideal way that we want to be living communication? And for me, when I look at it, the one way in which I can create that ideal for myself is in those relationships where I can develop intimacy, like with a partner or with family and close friends and people who share my ideology or whatever, like you guys, is that there are certain people in our lives that we can create that safe space with, that space where we can be ourselves, where we can make mistakes, where we can share ourselves in a moment of, you know what, at the moment I'm a little bit crazy, I'm having a tough time, I'm really angry, I'm really scared, I'm really sad, and this is how I'm feeling, and this is where I'm at, and it's not pretty. But the people that we're sharing it with are not going to judge us. They're not going to use that against us. They're going to honor that that connection of you know, people have difficult moments in life, and they're going to be there to support us because that's the agreement we have with them. That's the relationship we've developed with them. And we've created this safe space. And I find that sometimes it does evolve naturally in a way, but a lot of the time we have to actually spell it out, and we have to actually, like, physically or piece by piece create it with someone and say, look, this is what I want to create. This is what I'd like to be able to do with you. These are the challenges that I foresee we're going to have, and this is how I think we might be able to deal with those challenges, but this is how I want to create this particular point with you. Are you willing to do it with me too? And that's also something that can be difficult because it's like almost that vulnerability of what if they can't or won't. And so yeah, it can be a little bit scary to kind of put yourself in that position of saying to someone, hey, I want to bare my soul to you and have you support me no matter what and hear me no matter what. And if you do judge me, I want us to be able to work through it and come to a place of no judgment together. Because, you know, the reality is that people are not like that. People don't have that natural innate capacity, or not so much capacity, but rather the skill. We have the capacity for it, but we've not developed the skill to do it, to actually live it, to make it real.
I had a funny experience with that exact point where when I started working on my communication, I was in an office and I acted as if everybody was already there. My close, intimate friends that we had the trust and everything, and I would just bare my soul to these people. And I mean, it was probably a little bit intense. But I mean, yeah, it probably made some people uncomfortable. I've exposed more than I should have. But the cool thing that came from that is that I did make some good friends who could kind of keep up with that. Then I learned I was a few, very few. The majority of people, what I had to learn was how to master small talk and how to build from talking about the weather and how was your day and whatever. And then slowly, I remember the analogy was made where you're like a house and you're inviting someone through your front door with the small talk. And then you're slowly walking them down the hall and showing them the pictures on the walls. And then, maybe after a few weeks, you open your bedroom door and show them, or whatever, your guest room. And you slowly kind of show yourself bit by bit as you assess where your relationship with that person is at. Understanding that sometimes it's just they're not gonna get through the front door, and it's just not going to be that kind of relationship. But in that limited capacity, you can have, a limited version of the ideal that Cerise just described, which is something that sounds amazing, and I would want for everyone. But sometimes I think maybe just with your own personality, your own nature, it's not going to go there with everybody. So also to find those people who you click with and develop it with them, and develop it as much as you can with the others.
I always thought, thinking as well of like doing with the small talk is being funny as well. You know, when you talk to people, they're automatically they've got great humour in their small talk, and I can never think of something funny to say, or you know, just to make somebody, you know, laugh or something. But to do small talk with humour, I find that difficult. I don't know why, but yeah, I'm always trying to think, oh, what could I say? But yeah, that I find people that have humour in their small talk are seem to become over more appealing, that you know you can get on easier with them. But I just don't seem to be able to do it myself.
It's interesting. There are people, and there seems to be that skill where people are really, really good at small talk, and they're really, really good at like just saying like, "Wham! Hey, how you doing? Here I am. Let's be friends." Yeah. They tend to make very good salespeople, and not everyone could do that. I mean, I really struggle with small talk. If I go and meet someone and they ask me, "How are you?" I'm like, "Okay, I'm all right, thanks. How about you?" And they're like, "Oh, da, 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 da," and they tell me about their day, and I'm like, "Oh, cool." And then there's silence for a while, and I really try to talk about things, but I find it very difficult to talk about the socially accepted stuff that you talk to an acquaintance with, because it's usually like I'll bare my soul, or I'm talking about politics, or I'm talking about horses or dogs or cats or something, and if someone doesn't talk to me about that, I don't know how to relate to them like at all, and we end up just having these extended awkward silences where we're just both sitting there twiddling our thumbs because they try to engage with me, but I just can't respond in the way that they need me to be able to carry on the conversation. So that's one of my challenges. That's something that I've been practicing, you know, especially in the last, I think it's been 2 or so years that I've been with my husband, where I'm in different social situations. I'm meeting different people. I'm meeting a different type of people who I haven't really interacted that much with in the last almost 10 years. And I'm now having to deal with this. I'm having to try and make friends with people who otherwise I never would have even encountered at all.
You know, I just ask them like, "Oh, what do you know, how are you?" And depending on what they say, "Oh, where do you work? Oh, how do you find that?" Like, I just ask questions, and I find that people like to talk about themselves generally. They like to, you know, they like to express. It like gives people an opportunity to just speak, and I think most people generally do enjoy it.
That's exactly what I found, is that when I'm the one who's asking the questions rather than waiting for someone to ask me questions to start a conversation, then things are okay. People get happier around me. They get a little bit more relaxed around me because I'm showing interest in them. And so that is something I have discovered, and I use it because otherwise, you know, that's the whole awkward silence forever thing.
Exactly.
But interestingly enough, that when I started backpacking, I think I was backpacking in the Philippines many years ago, and when they talk, they touch you, and it's like they might touch your knee or your arm, but there's sort of like they bring in sort of like the physical touch while talking, and I thought, wow, this is fantastic. So I started doing it myself sometimes when I'm talking something and I feel a bit lost, and I'll just maybe just touch, and it changes everything for me. I just I feel like I can express myself a bit better. I mean, I don't remember what I've got to say, but I feel calmer when I talk. Just with the slight physical touch of, like, maybe touching their arm, or just slightly. And it changed everything for me, just physical touch. It was interesting.
I served in restaurants for a lot of years, and I found, for me, I would naturally touch the guests, like their shoulder or their back. If I was just like stopping by to check in, I was always touching, and my coworkers would be like, "Why are you touching the guests?" And I'm like, for me, it was just a natural way of communicating with them. Like, it matched what I was saying, or it matched my intentions with them, was just through a physical touch.
It makes me think of, like, if there's silence in the house, and you know, partners are not talking to each other, the other thing that's also happening is that we're not touching each other. There's no hugs, there's no touch on the shoulder, there's no cuddling in bed. It's like this isolated, rigid, there's a line in the sand and no one's crossing that line in word or in action, and it's like the silence is complete.
You know, there's more than verbal communication, and touch is another form of communication that I've been working on with people and animals, where it's like in the past I was almost afraid to touch people. I don't come from a touchy-feely upbringing, and I would touch very lightly and very quickly. I didn't have that comfort that you described, Kristina, where it's like a very natural thing for you. And I found with becoming aware of it and also working with animals and people that even my touch is changing, which is a form of communication where it's like even like a confidence or a clarity can come through in, you know, touching firmly or squeezing, or, you know, just being certain about who I am within touch. So yeah, I mean, there's more than just words, and I think touch is a really important form of communication, because it also, Carolyn said about how that helped her, is that it forms that communication that maybe you don't have the word, that connection that maybe you don't have the words for, the connection between two people that can be done through words, but also through touch.
It made things a lot easier for me. It was like I could communicate in a different way. Like they might understand what I'm trying to say by just touching them, and it did. It made things so much better for me. I felt more relaxed. I felt that they were understanding what I was trying to say, even though I might have had a block or something, and it just opened things up. And yeah, I communicate better. But I was the same also. There was no physical touch as a young person. For me, with family, it just wasn't done. But just to be able to do this now, and different form of communication is fantastic. But I've always been touchy with my dogs and animals and stuff like that. So yeah, it just seemed great to bring it into conversation with people and make myself feel more relaxed, and they seem to respond to it as well a lot better. Yeah.
I can tell in moments, like for me to be able to effectively listen to someone or communicate and interact with someone, it's a decision I have to make, because there are moments where, and I see it mostly with my partner because that's who I communicate daily with, where maybe there's been an issue that needs us to give some direction through communicating. And there'll be a point of refusal within me where I'll deliberately make the decision not to communicate or not to be open in that moment of communicating. Say he approaches me and is like, look, let's talk about this. And I have a decision to make in that moment, and I either say, no, I don't want to talk about it, or I'll let him talk, but I'm not really listening because I still have my wall up and I'm just still in the reaction. Versus making the decision of like, okay, you know what, I'm going to drop this reaction that I have. I'm going to, take out the blame. I'm just going to step back and just listen as a point of, there's a problem here and I know that communication is a way to solve it. And so I'm just going to embrace that point of walking towards the solution and just not allowing myself to have the wall up, but just, stopping and just listening and just hearing him and letting him say what he needs to say. And then the next step would be obviously for me to be directive in how I communicate and not go back into that reaction. But that's where I see it's a decision, to have effective communication. It's a decision you have to make, to be open and to be open to receive and to give.
Yeah, I can very much relate to that, because when I'm in that point of I'm reacting to someone, I'm angry with someone, or I'm hurt and I'm upset and I'm feeling all these things, it's like there's this experience within me where I don't want to hear them. I don't want to listen to them. The feeling is anything that you say to me right now is wrong, and it goes against everything that I am and everything that I stand for, because I'm right,
Yeah.
because it is. That's just how it is. And it's like that willingness to drop that, to put that righteous indignation and fury aside, and just say, okay, I'm going to hear you now. I'm going to listen. I want you to tell me where you're at. I want you to show me what happened in that moment. How are you feeling? Because a lot of the time, those reactions come from me interpreting or misunderstanding someone's actions or words, and I put my own meaning into it, and then I get angry with them for what I think they did and why I think they did it. When the reality is that it's not that. And once someone actually starts telling me, okay, this is actually what they were experiencing, this is actually what they were feeling, this is why they did it, it's like it puts me in a completely different position, a completely different mindset, because I'm now not looking at them through my own eyes anymore. I'm forced to put myself in their position. And yeah, that willingness to put myself in that position is one of the most important elements to communication, because if we're not willing to really hear someone and listen, then we're just going to keep being angry. We're just going to keep blaming them. We're going to keep making them wrong and making me right. And nothing ever is solved from that. No one ever learns anything about each other in that way. And it's really easy to forget that we're not the same. We don't do things for the same reasons. We don't think the same way. We don't have the same motivations or the same responses to things happening in life. So it's very unfair to impose our own interpretation of the world and behavior on someone else, because it's not likely that they have that same process of dealing with things.
But anyone that's in a public figure where we have an opinion or assumption about, it's like, you don't know this person. You've not sat down and had a real conversation with them. So how can you assume to know anything about what they're doing or where they're coming from? You know, we just, you know, that's again a point of we don't have all the information. So we can't make an accurate interpretation or assumption, if there is such a thing. But until you can actually sit down and talk to someone in a real way, you're not really going to know who they are or what they're doing or why or any of that.
Yeah, I think the thing that makes that moment difficult is that you are in fact having that reaction while you're communicating with them. So to realize, I mean, we so naturally just take that reaction and make it all of who we are. To have developed that skill of being able to step out of that reaction, and it's almost like sobering, you know, it's like you're drunk on this reaction. Can you in fact step out and act from a point of principle of, I'm going to now listen to you because I understand, and I know that if I can understand where you're coming from, my point of view is gonna change. But in the moment, it's like you'll have to first recognize that it's a reaction, recognize that it's not the only path, it's not all of who you are, that you do in fact have the ability to step outside yourself and sober up, and take that stance of, okay, now let me understand you. So I think it's really important to be able to, and to point out that it's not like all of us here are just like super easily, you know, understanding and asking these questions. It's, for me personally at least, it's very difficult to not take things personally, to understand that I'm not necessarily right, you know, in my kingdom here in my own head, where like I'm the ruler and I'm right about everything, to let someone else in there. So for me, that's just something to be practiced. for me through writing, but there's lots of different ways just to become aware of it.
Listening to people and having reactions come up, I seem to sort of like just be quiet if somebody's talking about a topic that I don't agree with, or they want to talk about something. I just seem to go more silent and just listen, and then try to keep my emotions, that I'm not judging or anything like that, and do a bit of breathing. And try not to say too much. I think once, like you say, when people like to talk about themselves, once they start expressing themselves, and they seem to be more comfortable. So if I find that if I'm more quiet and I stable myself, that they just do most of the talking and feel better about themselves and whatever they're saying, and then I can just look at who I am at the moment of them talking and see what comes up. So it's sort of a bit of an investigation time.
That is an equally important part of communication, to be an active listener and to receive that information without judging, which is super duper not easy at all, because everything that everyone around us does, we constantly just want to, label it and make ourselves feel better about whatever is going on and all of that. A difficult but very, I think, a rewarding process of having, even when you're talking to someone you disagree with, be able to hear them unconditionally. Doesn't mean you agree, but you're listening and you're checking yourself to see if you're at any point starting to judge them, and shut that down so that you can just connect with them on a level that is more where they're at, rather than wanting them to meet you where you're at, because that opens a lot of doors for different ways to connect and communicate with different people. Because the reality is that the world is filled with a whole lot of very, very, very different people, and one of the biggest challenges is that people can't relate to each other. Because when you hear someone talking, instead of like putting yourself in their shoes, you're going, oh, this person is a complete idiot. What are they talking about? I don't even know what they're saying right now.
I had an experience with that where I found in the moment, I'll call it a magical word, where in this situation it was somebody who was saying something about me, like I'm stubborn, or I don't know, was calling me something, and I just wanted to say, I'm not stubborn because look at all these examples where I was flexible, and you're actually the one that's stubborn because you did this. And it was like, instead in that moment I just went, why? And it was like I had to force the why to come out, where that one word was able to stop all of these thoughts and examples I was having, and I was able to say, okay, why do you think that, and where is this coming from? And so this example is like a personal, but you can use it for when somebody has ideologies or beliefs or opinions or whatever that you don't agree with, is to find out why. Like, how did you come to develop this understanding? What did you go through? Was it experiences? And then I found that when I took this route, I could actually understand, okay, actually, I can actually relate to how you developed, your opinion. And this is where I agree with you, and this is where I don't agree with you. And for me, I guess it's like, you kind of learn little tricks along the way, and then you develop and build upon them. But that was my first little trick, was to not speak, but to ask why and how and where, what, when. And every single time I'm able to relate on at least one point with people that I severely disagree with. And so for me, even having that one understanding where I can be like, okay, yeah, I get that, neutralizes a lot of the situation and redirects the communication to more of one that leads towards understanding solutions relationship building, the constructive things instead of just like Kristina, you had mentioned the talking at, where you end up with two people talking at each other and not even hearing each other.
I was communicating with my brother, and my sister had just gotten married, and we invited him and his wife to come. But my brother for a long time has been kind of anti-family events, and so he declined the invitation, which is his right to do that. He was not obligated to be there. But when I found out he was declining, I was so livid inside myself. I was so mad, and I was at work and he was texting me, and I started to respond, and then I deleted it because I said, no, that's a reaction. And then I started to respond again, but I stopped because it was a reaction. It was just like I attempted 3 different times to respond within this experience of absolute anger towards him, and I was like, you know what, I can't communicate with him right now because I'm so upset. So I didn't send him anything in my rage, and I actually left work and just took a walk, took a little break, and I just took a walk, and I looked at, why am I so angry? Why am I so angry that he's saying no? And the point that came up for me that I see was important for me to understand was to stand in his shoes and understand why he was saying no. It's again that why question. Why was he saying no to the invitation? To me, it made sense once I stood in his shoes why he would say no. So that alone really helped in letting go of that anger, because I could finally see from his perspective. And that was a communication that happened within myself. And that's something that I developed through writing, which is it's a form of communication with yourself. Just being able to reflect on something in a moment, and look at why, and what are the outflow consequences if I participate in this reaction. And it's like being able to just in a few moments take a moment with yourself and just look at who you are and change that. That's developing self communication. So that was an interesting thing to kind of see, and not allow myself to communicate in that reaction, because I would have just got him more upset and probably would have said something to make me more upset, and then we would have just been playing this, back and forth.
Yeah, and I'm sure that reaction in the moment was very intense and tempting to act from.
I had some good responses. I was like, you know what, brother? I'm gonna get you. Yeah, but I could see for myself that I was angry and I was spiteful and I wanted to hurt him like I thought he was hurting me and my sister, and I wanted to, but that just perpetuates the same issues, you know what I mean? It's not really even dealing with the issue, which is why is he uncomfortable, wanting to come? Or maybe that's not even the issue. The issue was, why would I be so invested in someone else's decision with how they live their life? Who am I in my life? How am I making my decisions?
I would recommend starting off with writing. For me, it started with my dad, where we had a lot between us, and I couldn't communicate it. And I moved out of the country and moved away, and all of a sudden he was out of my life. And I decided to put it on paper, and I would write him emails, and I would say, this is, what you are to me in my life. This is how you've helped me. This is how I feel about you. And we ended up emailing back and forth for a long time, establishing this whole new relationship, because both of us were in a position where it was intense, it was emotional, we weren't comfortable, where writing was more comfortable, where you can have that moment to kind of figure out what you want to say. So I think that's a really cool point that you were able to develop through writing also, where you're not necessarily writing to someone else, but writing to yourself, where everything slows down. And so that's a great starting point for developing communication with self and also communication with others.
Growing up in high school age and stuff, I used to write a lot of poetry, I guess you could say, but I also wrote, because I also had a conflictual relationship with my father. He was in and out of my life for a lot of years, and so I did a lot of writing to him, but he was never going to see them, but they were just me needing to express myself in relation to him not being a part of my life. And I didn't even realize probably how much that helped start to develop that communication, you know. And then, you know, over time, writing just for myself, you know, for me, especially I can see, you know, how I write, you know, when I'm just writing for myself, that's how I'm communicating with myself. The tonality of my writing, I guess you could say, reveals a lot how I communicate with myself. And how I communicate with myself is going to influence how I communicate with other people. So it is, I absolutely agree. It's
like a stepping stone, and then support throughout.
If I was in a place where there wasn't very many expats, and I always used to meet up with ladies that were, this was in China, and they'd come with their husbands, and they weren't, they were hating the place. And I found that they needed to talk, they needed to get a load off, they needed to get all this anger out of them. And this is where I think I developed a really good listening basis for me in communication, because I'd meet up with quite a few ladies in the week. They'd come, they'd dump all their rubbish on me, and I'd not have to pick any of this up. And I could find that I could sit there and just listen for hours. Sometimes some people want to talk for about 4 or 5 hours of, like, you know, how upset they are living in China and how awful it was, their life was. And I think I developed something really like some sort of good listening. I could listen and listen and listen for hours, and they'd get up. I'd walk away though, and I'd think to myself, gosh, I know their whole life, and I think they know that I've got 2 children, and that's it. But it was really good for communication for me, for that, just I could just relax, get to a place, and really listen to what they had to say, and be a support for them.
I think that's a cool, like, half the battle, you know, in this journey to develop communication, which is incredible when you have someone in your life that can listen like that. That's, I would be grateful. And I do have people in my life like that. But also cool because I was like you as well, in terms of listening, but not really injecting any of myself into the conversation, where I kind of felt like, oh, that's a shame that they don't know me, you know, because I didn't say anything. And so that's another skill, which is finding ways to insert your own personal experience or something you can relate to, you know, which I also had to learn, and I'm still learning. Because I would think that I was boring, or like I didn't really have anything supportive to say. It's like, man, you've mastered that one side there, and then it's just finding the balance.
Because I do practice mostly like asking people questions, and it was always like I just wanted to know about them. And then sometimes I would find like 2-hour conversations going by where they never asked anything about me, and I was like, I'm here too, you know, like they want to know anything about me. And so, but that to me was a point of, do I want to know anything about me? Why do I need another person to show interest in me? Am I interested in myself? You know, so it just goes back to that point of self-communication, you know, like, am I actually communicating with myself?
Yeah, I actually did an experimental blog recently where I found 20 questions off the internet, and I unconditionally answered them as thoroughly as I possibly could.
Ooh.
And at first it was really difficult, but then I was like opening up these points and these experiences and these memories and learning about myself, and I was like, damn, I never sat down and asked myself questions in the way that I actually get to know others. I never turned that around and did it to myself, you know, until this moment here where I'm writing this blog and answering these questions.
What I have found in my process and with my partner and myself in developing communication is it's actually a very powerful tool, and it supports in so many ways in terms of, you know, clarifying things, understanding things, getting, you know, people on the same page. an opportunity to give direction to things. Like, communication to me is absolutely essential, and the way that I've learned to communicate has been just like life-changing, really. And so for me, what I wanted to do was, I know there's a lot of people here who have really valuable things to say based on what they've lived and what they've developed, and I was like, we need to have a conversation, and we need to be able to show an example of different perspectives, basically. And so that was really, it's like the world doesn't communicate effectively. News is communication, movies is communication, music is communication, and we're all talking about a bunch of stuff that isn't really relevant to the lives of everyone, and how our world system impacts everyone. And so this, in a way, is inserting a little bit of common sense and inserting a little bit of change in terms of there is another way, like we can communicate about real things that matter.
Everybody's got something to say.